Hello and welcome to another EU4 video. I keep getting this question everywhere, so I'll just say it here. Post-Leviathan EU4 is now mostly playable on patch 1.31.4. There are still some bugs, but nothing is game-breaking as far as I have noticed. The game is getting slightly better with each patch, which is great. I've actually been playing quite a bit of EU4 on Twitch recently, and I did a few runs there to check out how well the galleys and naval combat in general plays in early game. So I played a little bit with Venice and Denmark and then Brunei. A naval playthrough is definitely more fun in this patch, I think, since a lot of naval mechanics have been overhauled lately, and for this video we are going to focus on galleys. Galleys got a major buff this patch. Their combat width was halved, which means for each naval combat width you could fit 2 galleys, which means double the amount of damage you can do. To put it in context, a heavy ship takes up 3 whole combat widths. So if you put 1 heavy ship against equal combat width of galleys, that 1 heavy will be fighting 6 galleys. That is obviously a massive buff to galleys. Effectively, they are now twice as strong on this patch compared to older patches. And so there have been a few discussions on forums and Reddit and YouTube videos about how galleys are stronger than heavies in this patch. I saw a couple of those videos, and it's actually very interesting to see that galleys beat heavies on open seas at every tech level. It's really insane, and that might get balanced in future patches, but we'll have to wait and see on that. So based on the current discussions, I have seen several comments on forums and Discord servers that you should just build galleys, and heavies are not worth building at all. Which I don't think is accurate. So I decided to make this short video to make my case of what a navy composition should look like and why galleys are not a be-all end-all solution. First of all, I'll mention it again. At full combat width, galleys beat heavies at every tech level. That has been established, and I'm not going to show it again in this video. If you want, you can check out Absolute Habibi's video on it. He did a quick test. There's a link in description. So yes, galleys do beat heavies in open seas, in coastal seas, and obviously in inland seas. But that scenario is true on paper mostly. In practice, things get a bit more complicated. I guess like everything else in EU4. To get a good overview of what galleys versus heavies look like, I made this nice spreadsheet with all the relevant numbers. It shows how with each relevant tech, the naval combat width changes and how many galleys or heavies you will need to fill out the combat width, and how many cannons would be in your composition, along with sailors and ducats cost for both building and maintenance. Let's look at some graphs from this spreadsheet. These are graphs comparing galleys and heavies on how many are needed to fill the combat width, on how many cannons would they have at full combat width, how many ducats and sailors it would cost to build them, and their maintenance cost in ducats per month. The blue line is for galleys and the red one is for heavies. So we can see we need more galleys to fill the combat width than heavies, which makes sense, but you really need a lot of galleys. At max combat width, we have 140 galleys versus 23 heavy ships. And that difference is translated in every other graph here. Galleys have more cannons, really a lot more, which explains why galleys beat heavies even in open seas. The build cost for galleys is more as well, even though heavies are significantly more expensive individually. And there's a similar trend for how many sailors you need to build a full combat width of galleys versus heavies. The only place where heavies are more expensive is their upkeep. The maintenance cost for heavies is way more than galleys, more than twice actually. I did not include any sailors maintenance graphs here, as sailor maintenance is calculated as 2% of sailors needed to build a ship, so we already know the trend would be similar to the build sailors cost one. So without complicating this video too much, let's take a look at the combat width graph. This one shows how many ships we need to fill the combat width at different tech levels. At tech 7, we need 60 galleys and 10 heavies to fill the combat width. Now tech 7 is around the year 1485, 1490-ish, and there's no way you have 60 galleys by then, unless you're actually playing a naval nation. I mean, even as Ottomans or Ming, you're not going to build 60 galleys. You are less likely to build 10 heavies as well, but you can maybe sustain that with, say, England or France or Castile maybe. However, as you progress through the years, say around mid to late game, typically you should be able to afford a full width of navy. So say at tech 19, which is around 1620-ish, you can fill out combat with 110 galleys or 18 heavies. And now that you look at these numbers, wouldn't you say that you're more likely to have 18 heavies than have 110 galleys? I'm talking about a normal playthrough, of course. We are not talking about a role playing as a full naval nation with naval maritime ideas, because that doesn't happen very often. Cost is typically not a concern at this point in game, so you could pick between going full galleys versus going full heavies. And we know that full galley naval combat width will win all naval battles in inland seas, coastal seas, and open water. So why did I say that galleys aren't the solution? Well, let's talk about practicality. The first problem is your naval force limit. Depending on how many coastal provinces you own, you could have the force limit to afford full 110 galleys. However, the naval force limit is not the same as combat width in that one naval force limit counts for one ship, regardless of the type. So for example, let's say you actually have a 110 naval force limit and you build a 110 galley fleet. You will beat every other navy with the same combat width. However, you won't be able to build any more fleets such as transports and light ships, which are needed in game as well. You could build them and go over the force limit, but that will dramatically increase the cost for your navy. Now, if you fill that same combat width with 18 heavies instead, you will still have 92 naval force limit left to build some transports and a ton of light ships. And these light ships will make you money, and they will steal trade money from your enemies in the form of economic warfare. So in practice, it is better to have a full width of heavies that you can just keep mothballed if you can't afford their upkeep and bring them out in times of war. The second big problem is the morale hit on losing ships, which is a naval combat mechanic. Basically, whenever your fleet loses a ship in combat, all the other ships get a morale hit. Since galleys have way less hull points than heavies, they are more likely to go down in a fight, and thus you get more frequent morale hits, which affects all remaining ships' morale. Now, people have already shown that morale hit is not enough to take down a full combat with galley fleet versus a full combat with heavy fleet, but in practicality, we again get back to practice rather than theory. You would have some ships in the next sea tile ready to reinforce the naval battle, just like we do in land battles where we slowly reinforce troops. If you're already maintaining a full galleys fleet, it's unlikely you will have a lot more force limit remaining to have additional ships that can reinforce a battle. However, you could easily build some more heavies and have them slowly join this naval battle. I did some testing on this, and if you reinforce properly, the heavy fleet with reinforcements will beat galleys in open seas and coastal waters. A third minor point that also favors heavy fleets is the hegemon mechanic. To get the naval hegemony, you need 250 heavy ships. So if you're building a heavy fleet, you can just keep building more heavies until you have 250 of them. I think it's not realistic in a normal game to build 250 heavies. I mean, you fill out the max combat width at 23 heavies. I don't know why you would want to build 250 of them. The devs need to bring the numbers to a more reasonable level at some point. But also the economic hegemony needs an income of 1000 ducats, and that's where a light ship fleet will be very useful. And you could build a ton of light ships if you haven't spent all your naval force limit in building a full galley fleet. So now that I have confused everyone, since I said galleys beat heavies everywhere, but heavies might still be useful, what do we really take out from this video? Well, in my opinion, early game galley spam is good, since no one is going to have a full combat width of either galleys or heavies realistically. But as the game progresses, you should switch to a full heavy combat width aided by galleys. The percentage of galleys and heavies will depend on your economy and your naval force limit and your modifiers. I need to do some more testing to figure out the exact percentage, to be honest. I have found some success with having a full combat width of heavies to start the fight, then reinforce them with galleys slowly. So late game, you would have 23 or 25 heavies and then about 40 galleys reinforcing the fight slowly. Although take this with a grain of salt, as I have not done any thorough testing on it. I just rarely play EU4 late game, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. One thing we did not talk about was the modifiers for naval battles. Galley compatibility modifiers are easier to find and easier to stack compared to heavy ship compatibility modifiers. So if you have a lot of galley compatibility, you might want to run a fleet with a higher number of galleys. This percentage would change a bit with strong naval nations such as Denmark and Portugal. I think both of those nations can get away with having a larger galley fleet or even a full galley combat width fleet. Denmark gets a lot of naval force limit and extra engagement width, while Portugal gets reduction to morale hit when ships sink and also more disengagement chance. So, in conclusion, don't run a full Galleys fleet even if they're better than heavies in a vacuum. In practice, in game, it's better to have Galleys early game and slowly shift towards a full heavies combat with aided by Galleys. And just use the rest of your naval force limit to have ton of light ships and some transports. Needless to say, if your campaign is only limited to inland seas, just focus on building Galleys, you'll win everything. I do want to do a proper naval composition guide at some point once I have done some more testing. Make sure you're subscribed here so you don't miss out on that video in future. And for today, I hope this rambling short video provided some insight on how Galleys line up against heavies. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Please leave a comment on what you think about it and if you have used full Galleys or full heavies fleet and how it turned out. You are watching a Radio's Guide. Thank you for your time and I'll see you all in the next one.